So, might switch this light off just enough for you guys to track with me. Okay, equalization. Spelled with a Z in America, spelled with an S in Britain. So if you ever see the flip-flop, that's why. Let's just talk about how this works out processing-wise. There's a couple mixing components that you guys need to be familiar with, just very basic stuff. But when you're working in tracking and when you're working in mixing, you're looking at a couple things that need to be kind of set up in order to be able to hear one sound from another. And balance, of course, is just as a short definition, balance is specifically the volume of independent items. So if I said all of us were going to play an instrument and a song together, and in order to audibly hear everybody evenly, we have to make sure there's balance, the balance levels between us really work out with each other. Now, I will say, sadly, unless you guys are in some sort of a cappella choral group where everybody has an even part, and even then it's not that even, in reality, in a mixed down process, no one is equal. In reality, right? A lot of times the drums are on the forefront. A lot of times that rhythm section is honing in the rhythm, but they have to gel together as a unit, which means they have to be closely associated. But in order for them to gel as a unit, that also means that they kind of have to give up a little bit of themselves in terms of their overall volume. And of course, once the lead vocalist comes in, they kind of take it away. There needs to be enough musical energy, but at the same time, again, that lead vocal becomes prime. If you guys had, if you were singing background vocals, you can't expect to be where the lead is, in terms of balance, right? Then there's spatial imaging, what we call spatial imaging, which is just simply panning. Like, where are you positioned in the left-right spectrum of the stereo field? So where in there? So, like, we have balance in order to keep everybody, in their spot so we can hear them all. And then we have spatial imaging so we can hear them in their, perspective spots and in that whole sense. And then this is where we come to frequency imaging, frequency enhancement. Frequency enhancement essentially being equalization. Further processing, we'll get into dynamic processing next week, which will be fun if you guys are super excited about compression and limiting. That's like the best part. That's the rock and roll of the processing realm, So first we're going to handle EQ. Oh, and I already kind of said this, so I'll just skip through this very quickly, and let's go here. Okay, so frequency imaging, placing content at optimal positions within the frequency band. So we have a natural frequency band in our human hearing range of what? What to what? What's our range again?
Like 250 to 1,000.
That's kind of small. What is it? 20 hertz to what? 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Human hearing range. 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. It's a huge range. So we're going to position things uniquely within inside of that frequency band. Bad news. Here's the bad news. Okay, so you guys ready for some bad news? If it's musical content, I'll tell you, if it's for theatrics, like for film, they kind of have it easy in the realm. Because there's a lot of different sounds that they can be using that are uniquely identifiable just within the frequency band as they stand alone. But when it comes to music, if people are supposed to be in the same key, guess what? They're using a lot of the same frequencies and octaves of those frequencies, which makes it easy to kind of lose sounds and individuals in a musical composition once that starts happening. Now, I'll say, notice it says collaborative unity amongst the core musical elements. A lot of times in music, we track. So this is really interesting, and this is something you guys will learn as you start doing it, okay? You record in a certain method, right? And although it's suggested to record with, you should record with a vision of what it's going to sound like in the mix. But you don't immediately record the way you mix, which means that like when you're recording something, you want to make sure you're getting a good full spectrum from that instrument and keeping in mind that it won't stay that way in the mix, so you eliminate some things that maybe you don't necessarily need, and you're going to contour it in that regard. But it doesn't mean that because because I've seen it happen, someone's behind glass, and they go, yeah, this part's never going to be heard. This is just like the 25th part of this element. It's not going to be even heard, so we're just kind of ignore it as we record it. You know what I mean? And that's not the approach. The approach still is, even the most minute thing that's going on in the background that may not ever really be heard, but maybe is felt, has to have a lot of attention spent on it. So when you're tracking it, you're not tracking it at the volume that you would mix it. You're tracking it at the optimal volume, at some sort of nominal volume, right? So you hear it differently than you really will in the mix. And the difference really is two things. The Fletcher-Munson curve, right? You remember the Fletcher-Munson curve, which says as you turn that up, you get more even balance between the highs and the lows. So if I'm recording, let's just say I'm recording a tambourine part, and I know that tambourine part's going to be more in the background. But while I'm recording that tambourine part, I have it kind of loud in the control room so I can hear whether it's on time or not. Well, obviously it's going to sound different than it will in the mix because of the fact that it's going to be turned down. The Fletcher-Munson curve tells us as soon as we turn it down what happens to the highs and the lows, right? Yeah, essentially. Well, and when they go, as that goes up, they even out. As we go down, they subdue, which means mid-focus, right? And a lot of times what I see, like in a lot of students that are mixing, and they'll just turn something down. They're in the mix, they already got it set up to turn something down just a little bit, and they'll go, why does it all of a sudden start to sound hollow when I turn it down? Well, just remember, by turning it down, you're losing the energy of it, and the Fletcher-Munson curve says we perceive it with the mid-focus more than we do highs and lows. So what we have to do is we have to find like the right contours, but we have to also make sure that we denote and we specifically know there's a difference between the way you track it and you hear it when you're tracking frequency-wise, and there's a difference between the way you approach it when you're using those frequencies in the mix down. They're not necessarily one and the same. Does that make sense? Because sometimes you don't know. Like, great example, piano. We did a couple tracks on the piano, and you guys kind of heard the different sounds. If I knew that the piano wasn't really going to be a main focus, maybe I would thin it out a little more. I'd make it a little more mid-band range, something that could cut through with the rest of the band, but not as much depth because there's maybe a bass player and I don't want them necessarily get in the way. But here's where the problem exists, okay? What if the song starts off with just a piano and a vocal, and then right after the verse, a full band kicks in? You follow me? You technically have two, in the mix, you'll have two different approaches to that sound. One that fits by itself and plays beautifully by itself and stands alone. Another which, as soon as you add it to the band, has to shift so it feels like it's part of what's going on with the band. Which means there's technically you would automate that change, or you would just separate those tracks, those two transitions, and you would EQ one in one way and EQ another in another way. But you have to take two different approaches. But that also means that when you're going to do your tracking process, you can't just go, this is what it's going to sound like in the mix, and just leave it. You essentially have to have it open so that enough that you could change it in one way or the other in post. So with all that in mind, let's talk about how we would go about doing this and what kind of tools we have to use. So first of all, remembering that equalization is the process of manipulating the frequencies. But here's the key, and here's where it gets confusing, so it's super important for you to remember this. Okay? There's a multitude of frequencies going on right now as I talk to you. So there's a multitude of frequencies happening all at one time. If I go in and I EQ certain specific elements of those frequencies, you have to remember that all frequencies will not necessarily be affected, because what we're going to do is we're going to isolate what ranges we're going to choose to be affected by the EQ. But by affecting one range of the frequency, we actually technically do affect the perception of the other range of the frequency. Does that make sense? So by changing one realm of it, it doesn't isolate it by itself, do nothing to the other realm. Technically, it does change something. So, great example, okay? If my voice, while I talk to you, has a little more low, mid, and not so bright, and all of a sudden I EQ the high frequencies so they're super bright, the perception isn't just that I turned up the high frequencies and it's brighter. A lot of times the perception is it's actually also thinner in the low mid. Does that make sense? Because we added something in one realm that kind of made it feel like there's a perception of an unbalanced realm on the other side. And just know your overall goal. So this is the trick. This is the key, tricky part. Your overall goal on the combined sources, all of your combined sources, when they work together, your goal is a flat frequency response, not an unevenness in the frequency response. When they're all together, it should be flat. But they're all little puzzle pieces that will fit inside of that realm in order to get flat. Does that make sense? So then the problem with it is that when we go back to the balance, we talked about balance. Problem with it is that let's say we have a kick drum. It's a nice, powerful, low-end kick drum. It's got some punch up top, but it's carrying the low end. As soon as we accidentally turn that up too much, even though we may have EQ'd it correctly, we turn that up a little too much, a couple dB too much, all of a sudden it's going to make the mix feel lopsided. It makes the mix feel, this mix is tubby, it's heavy. All we have to do is kind of just turn that one thing down instead of taking a graph to the whole thing and shifting the graph. We literally could just go to that one element and really kind of lower it a little bit. So that's kind of the weird part about the mix process is you're kind of working with all these moving pieces. And that's why you don't mix before you're done with a song. You know, does that make sense? So like if you went in, you tracked a couple instruments, you don't really want to start mixing just yet. You're better off leaving everything flat at nominal and maybe a couple levels for monitoring purposes. But let's get everything in first. Because once you start mixing it, you bring something else in, oh, it throws a huge wrench in, you know, everything that's going on already. Does that make sense? So you're kind of building around this EQ idea. So let's talk about the processing itself. And this is the level of processing we were talking about. Processing overall is essentially, by definition, it's taking what the original content was and manipulating it. How we see it is processing elements we can use: equalization, compression, limiting, gate, expansion, reverb, delay, and any other effects would be considered processing. Does that make sense? So if I said, hey, I processed this sound, I could be talking about any one of those. Today we're talking about frequency processing. And before we jump too far, just to give you an idea of how this may or may not work out. This is just a basic track list for music production. A lot of times you can use, you know, when you do drums, a lot of times you use, you know, things like dual miking the kick. So you kick one, kick two, dual miking the snare, snare top, snare bottom. Maybe even a snare 1 and 2 on top. I've seen side snare, you know, every now and then you'll see someone go, oh, let's take 2 on the top, 1 on the bottom, 1 on the side. And of course they'll combine that in the end to something. You know, hat, tom, floor toms, overheads, room mics to capture the full tone of the room. Then you'll have a bass guitar, maybe bass DI, keys, piano, synth, and that's not even the end of the list. So we carry on into, and of course this is why this is so important, because the list continues to go on in terms of most mixed productions. I mean, I'll say most of the stuff, like, because you were asking me a while ago about the stuff that I work on. Most of the stuff I work on, like writing by myself, even before I send it off to somebody else to collaborate with me on, a lot of times it'll end up 12 to 24 tracks before it moves on to the next stage. You know, and that might just be, you know, synth, keys, guitars. You know, sometimes I'll lay in a rhythm section with the drums or some piano. You know, who knows what it is. But by the time we're all done, we're usually looking at, you know, 40-something, 60-something, 80-something. One of the biggest projects I worked on, I think, you know, even when we had everything whittled down, we still ended up above 100 tracks, you know, and it's like, you know, in some instances, it just depends on what you do and how you do it. I mean, if you know, one of the big things that we had is we just had a huge arrangement of strings, you know, and a lot of the songs, and we had as soon as you add strings and have a bunch of layers of it and a bunch of background vocals, you know, you can see how essentially deep this gets. You got vocal 1 for the verse, vocal 2 for just the chorus. You know, and a lot of times when you're actually tracking and getting this stuff set up, most of the production that you hear on the radio, from a vocal standpoint, almost always has doubles, what they call vocal doubling. And so they're double layers underneath of the main hooks. So instead of them just singing it once, they'll sing it again, try to align it, they'll have it right underneath to add some power. But then even beyond that, what they'll do is that they realize dynamically we can't necessarily get away with having the same sound of the vocal in the verse as we do in the chorus, so they'll literally separate them. So we'll track just the verse, and we'll track just the chorus, we'll put them on separate tracks, we'll process them as if they're standalone, and then as they work from one to another, the energy level goes up and down as we transition from part to part inside the song. So that just means more and more and more and more and more and more. Just to give you an idea before you really get it. So that really kind of highlights the need for why we really want to have some separation. Now the downside, and of course there's some basic effects tracking that you may have, so reverbs, delays, short and long, a verb for the snare, maybe some extra effects. One thing I always mention is just say, hey, you know, one of the big things that we run into equalization-wise, because you may say, hey, I really don't need that much equalization. I only just make a simple beat, and then I stack a bunch of vocals on. And to me, that's actually the most dire situation for equalization in terms of processing, because in most cases, what most people don't realize is that let's say I have one kick drum, and I have one snare. Okay, one kick drum, one snare, one guitar line, maybe a tambourine, right? A bass line, and then 10 layers of vocals. What's going to happen with my frequency spectrum is if I'm not very careful, I have low end, I have the guys in the low end, I have the guys in the high end, but the vocals are all very mid-range based, which means as soon as I stack a bunch of vocals, all of a sudden my song went from being nice and even to up and up and up and up and up, right in the middle. Does that make sense? So it's all, as soon as all that stuff starts stacking up, we got to work it all the way back down. We kind of have to, you know, kind of level it back out. It has to be subdued. And what's interesting is, like, first thing I do in a mix, not in the tracking, first thing I do in a mix with my levels is let's start from 0 and we work our guys up. Instead of starting everybody at nominal and working them down, we start from negative infinity off, and we work everybody up. And instead of taking the first thing up to nominal, we kind of slowly get everybody in, lightly get everybody in. We have to make sure that we realize that, like, the vocal might really be down here, you know, in some instances. Is it on the forefront? Is it really supposed to be on the forefront? Is it supposed to be in the background? Is it part of the overall sound? Having to make, now, equalization, I'll say this. For you who are working on your own music, if you work on your own music, just put a producer's hat on and just be really critical about equalization. It's kind of easy to do if you're not involved in the project, right? So like any other mix engineer would come in and just go, you know, do this and do that, and this needs to go, this needs to go, and this needs to go, and not the actual sounds, but the frequencies that are involved. This one can go, this one can go, we don't need this one, you know, but as the artist, a lot of times you're like, oh, I built it and I cultivated it to have that sound, you know, and so it's harder to let it go sometimes when it has to move out of the way for something else to really be able to fit in. And that's kind of the big, like, I deal with that a lot with drummers. You know, when I was in college, I realized the worst thing to deal with was a drummer who played by himself. Like, if the drummer was great as a solo drummer, in most cases they didn't do very well in the studio, because as soon as they came in and laid down their stuff and they loved it, and then they heard what had to be done to it in order to make room for everybody else, a lot of times they kind of got offended, and they weren't really sure, like, what, especially if, you know, we were like, well, this section of the song, I think we could go without the drums. Just, I mean, you ever do that to a drummer in that kind of realm, they get very offended. A lot of musicians that I've worked with, if they're too isolated to themselves, they're very used to hearing how they sound by themselves. They're very used to, I mean, I worked with a guitar player that had like 3 amps behind him always. And so when we go in the studio and we say, hey, bud, your part's like this big and we have to rein it in, you know, it's like for him, every time he plays, well, I play with a wall of amps. And this is, my sound sounds like this. And it's like, well, in reality, your sound still will sound like that, but it has to come down to where everybody else is at so that everybody can sound like that. You know, so that's kind of one of the big things. So when we look at this, we're manipulating the frequencies. Big thing about this is, by definition, you do need to understand this. Bandwidth. If I said band or bandwidth, it's a range of frequencies. That's what I'm talking about. Inside the single source, it's a range of frequencies. Now, I didn't put this on here, but one tip about equalization. You cannot EQ in or out, meaning add to or take away from any frequency that does not exist in the sound source. Does that make sense? So you can't actually add high frequencies if the sound source never had them. And one of the reasons that I mention that is because a lot of times, like samples, if you guys use samples, okay, this happens all the time in the studio. Someone will bring in a sample, and they'll go, oh, it just needs more low end, and you'll go actually listen to the sample and go, okay, but here's the problem. When the sample was created and when it was manipulated, before you even push any of those keys to play that sample or record that sample for you, the people who designed it didn't design it with that frequency involved. That happens a lot with the kick. You know, a lot of times they'll get kick samples, and it's like, oh man, these guys went down to 100 hertz and they cut it off. So if you want 60, it's not there. You know what I mean? Like, it's super flat. It's designed that way. Go get another kick sound, one that includes that range. Otherwise, we don't have anything down there. Does that make sense? So it's important to know that if you don't have those frequencies involved in the original source, you won't be able to manipulate that. One of the big keys with that, and I don't know if we have, oh no, we don't. I don't see any down there. One of the big keys with that is the roll-off filter. You guys remember the roll-off filter on a preamp? On a preamp, you guys remember on a preamp, there's a filter. What does the filter do? Filter on a preamp. I know, it's Halloween. Scary stuff. Check it out. So, remember this roll-off? Essentially, it's called a filter. This is a high-pass filter or a low-cut filter. Okay? High-pass filter, if you select it, you can tell it. Anything below 40 hertz, gone. Anything below 80 hertz on this one, gone. A lot of these are at 80 hertz or 100 hertz. This one will go up to 160, which is a little abnormal on a mic because that's pretty high. But again, if you roll that off, this is why you should know this. If you roll that off before you recorded something, you can't get anything below it after it's done, after you've recorded it with that roll-off on. So that's why sometimes if you don't know what it should be rolled off to, you shouldn't roll it off, unless you really know. Now, times you're going to roll it off. You might roll it off on the piano on the high side. right? Because it doesn't make much sense to have anything, really at that low range frequency on the high side. It makes sense to have it on the low side. Maybe your roll off on the low side is 40 because you really don't want sub-frequencies, because it doesn't make sense to have sub-frequencies, but you might want some of 60, 70 range, so you kind of want to make sure it is rolled off. And when you roll it off here, the helpful part about rolling it off here if it's not supposed to be there is if it's super loud on here, it takes away from the qualities of everybody else. Which means when you EQ it in post, you can kind of fix it, but you don't really take away enough of it to really even it out everywhere else where it's supposed to be. So a lot of times it's good to roll it off if it's supposed to be. Other times though, if you're not supposed to roll it off, don't, or if you're unsure, don't. On a vocal, yeah, you'll roll it off to 80. You're not going to use below 80 on vocal. Unless you were doing dialogue, and you wanted someone to sound like James Earl Jones, you're not going to really need that. But again, that's why you need to know that. So let's talk about EQ types. I'm going to jam through these. So there's three main types of equalization that are out there. There is graphic EQ, parametric EQ, and the hybrid graphic parametric, which is very popular right now, and that's what every DAW piece of software uses. I'm going to talk actually about what their differences are and how they're used. And then I'll start showing you some examples here. This is a graphic EQ. I'm going to share these slides with you. I'm kind of jamming through this. So I'll share these slides with you on Canvas in the event that you guys don't get a chance to get through all. Does that make sense? Just so I can keep moving. A graphic EQ, essentially, it does what the other one does, except that it literally has a fader assigned to each part of the band. And the problem with this is the con of this is that when you too sharply adjust a section of the band, it manipulates and affects the neighbor. And how it affects the neighbor a lot of times is it makes it seem like the neighbor is louder than it actually is. So you actually have to go in and curve a little bit. You kind of see it. It's hard to see, but you kind of see it as curved instead of it just being one really spike. These are amazing for two things. For setting up your overall tone of the room in your monitors. Like I use these on my monitors at home. So what I do is I go, and once you set it, you can forget it. Set up the monitors, you do a simple what they call a real-time analysis test. Throw up a mic, you analyze what the room spectrum sounds like. You will even this out and adjust this so that the speakers, your monitor speakers, essentially will come out nice and flat and even in the room. Because maybe they have too much brightness on just the speakers or too much low end. You even that out so that whatever you record through it, you have a real representation of what that sounds like. Because a lot of times the room size will benefit some frequencies better than others. And so what happens is if I take that set of monitors that's in there and I play them in here, they're going to sound different in here than they will in there. And if I even set them here, they'll sound different than they sounded if I set them over here. Because of the way that the frequencies are used in the shape of the room. So a lot of times you'll graph it out, what they call cueing a room or tuning a room. You'll set it, forget it. You'll never touch it again. Unless you need to fix it. The other thing that these are great for is feedback elimination on a live stage. So on a live stage, when someone's getting a monitor, a floor monitor, and they're singing live, a lot of times the easy thing to do is they'll ring out a monitor to make sure that in the room that it's being used in, that it's not prone to frequencies that may feed back. Just because they get too excited in that particular space. So they'll use one of these, they'll go, oh, this is the frequency that's feeding back, bam, let's just get rid of it. Or let's manipulate it so it's very, very low compared to everybody else. And we can pick out those individual isolated frequencies. This is beneficial when you have something like that because this one is a 31 band, which means there's 31 faders. And you go, oh, this one's good, this one sucks, this one's good, this one's good, this one's good, and you can manipulate as many as you need to. When we get to the next type of EQ, you have a very limited range of, or I shouldn't say range, you have a very limited number of manipulations you can make at a single time. And that's where we get into parametric EQ. And parametric EQ, which you'll see the visuals in a second. I think I had that. If I had one on there. This is what a parametric EQ looks like. This is what you normally see here. This is what you normally see on this console back here. That's exactly what's on the Euphonics console in there. Although the interesting part is you go to the individual channels here, you'll have parametric EQ. You go to the master section, you'll have a 31 band graph. It's digital, but that's how it's designed. Parametric EQ is better for individual sources. So like if I'm recording vocals or drums or individual sources as we track, individual sources as we mix. Because they're smoother adjustments, they're limited adjustments, and they're overall adjustments, which means they don't manipulate the sound so much that it takes it from a natural state to a very unnatural state by inducing noise. Now, these are the parameters that belong to it, but if you want to look at it just one more time, oh, did I set, oh no, I didn't. The parametric EQ, you know the difference very easily because in a 31 band you're using sliders and parametric you're using knobs. So if you need a cheat sheet on how to remember that, knobs, sliders, right? When you go to the digital one it kind of changes but it still looks the same in the representation. But we need to talk about the parameters. You're going to use parametric EQs, 9 times out of 10. You get good at this, you're golden. Recording wise, you know what I mean? Like processing wise, you're golden. This is the good stuff. This is the stuff you need to get very familiar with. So from a parameter standpoint, are any of you even familiar with this? Have you guys used this yet? Have you kind of used it a little bit? Or some? Quite a bit? Okay, so the Q is, I'm just going to give you the term and you'll see it. The Q is the bandwidth. Q is essentially how wide are the frequencies we use. So you're going to see when we set up the EQ, when we turn the EQ up or down, we'll have a bandwidth range of who else is affected. You know what I mean? Like, is it very narrow and only the select frequencies that are targeted there are affected, or are we just going to have a broad curve to the overall? A lot of times, like, 'cause people ask me all the time, well, how do you know how much to give to add here, to add there? Well, good news here. Sometimes you're literally just ballparking the figure and using wide enough Q, broaden it, tighten it, and all of a sudden you hear it and you go, oh yeah, that's the sweet spot for the Q. But it's not one and the same from item to item. And the reason it can't be, and that's where it gets a little tricky, is you can't go online and go, well, what's the best EQ graph for my vocal? The reason that doesn't work is because the room will affect the starting frequencies, the frequencies that are even in the vocal mic. The vocal mic itself has a frequency response. The system itself has a frequency response. The DAW has a frequency response. Guess what? Your vocal has a frequency response. So you can't actually just set one frequency, or you can't set one graph or EQ for your voice and then expect you to come up and it sound the same. You know what I mean? Like, we'll have to go in and contour specific things for your voice, even if you guys are singing in the same key. Because there's different frequencies being used from one to another, So, but anyway, that's bandwidth. The frequency, of course, is which frequency is manipulated. Gain is just a boost or a cut or raise or lower, it's up or down. That essentially is, when you get to that knob, that is turn it up, turn it down. Now, you guys have this in your basic stereo system on your car. If you ever went to your car and you saw high, mid, low, you basically have this, a parametric EQ built into your stereo system. So when you turn up the high, that is gain. You don't get to select your frequency or your Q, but you're gaining that range. So whatever they determine, predetermined is high frequency, predetermined is the mid, predetermined is the low. What I don't like about stereo systems in the car is that technically, I don't know if you guys have noticed, there's two methods for stereo systems in the car. One, you'll look at one stereo system and it'll start, the gain for high, mid, and low will start at 0, and you can either turn it up or turn it down. And you go to look at another system in a car, and instead of it being turn it up or turn it down, it may just be all the way up, or or you adjust it from there. So it's kind of, it's not an evenly congruent level, because one of the problems with it is that the way that the gain structure is set up in a car system is essentially, if you fade it to the front, it actually gets thinner, and you fade it to the back, it gets fuller. But it's because the way that the system's worked out is you have that EQ, but as soon as you shift more to one to the other, the front speakers have more high and mid frequencies typically, and the back speakers have all the low end. So it's kind of you're used to using it, but it's not an equal system. It doesn't work the most appropriately, because as soon as you change the fade from front to back, you're into a whole different set of frequencies that are being used. So boost is just a common term for saying turn it up. Cut is a common term for turn it down. Flat is no alteration. That makes sense? So if I said, hey, can you put that frequency flat, that means drop it at 0. And you'll see it in the way these work out. So this is just a visual. So this is the frequency range. This is, of course, frequency side to side. Q is how wide, gain is up or down. Make sense? Nothing too crazy. So let's talk about these, okay? How did I set these up? Oh, Actually, okay, so I broke these down in the parametric visual here. On the parametric, when you look at this in the slides, you'll be able to see it a little better. We're looking at it here at the very top, in this section up here in the red. This is HF, stands for high frequency. This is HMF, stands for high mid frequency. So like it's a different range. So essentially we start off in the high group, high mid group. Down here in the blue is a low mid group. Down here at the bottom is a low group. And so what I did is it's the same picture you'll see, but over to the right it kind of just defines them. HF is high frequency filter. The range is limited specifically to high frequencies. You can boost or cut. The default is a shelf. You don't know what that is yet, but you're going to see it in a second. So the default style is a shelf. Notice that the top two red knobs there's only two of them, where in the middle, green and blue have three, and then at the low, that brown one only has two again. So what happens is you can actually switch that to be a bell style range. So that these two have a Q knob. This one doesn't, and this one doesn't. But if you switch it to bell, it's a fixed Q, and the variable is how hard, how much gain you give it versus how little. And then the high mid frequency focuses on mids. The low mid frequency focuses on low mids. Those all have sweepable frequencies and sweepable Qs. And then the low frequencies focus on the lows. So let's take a look at, this is the more common, what you normally see on a DAW system. This is a Pro Tools EQ, and I'll bring up a Pro Tools EQ in a second here. We already talked about boosting and cutting, but what this is, just to kind of clarify, this is the hybrid version. What you see is, in the hybrid version, you still see a graphical representation. You can actually grab and move. But down below, these knobs are all your parametric. So technically, it's really more of a parametric. And a lot of times, what did I say? What is a band? What's a band? A range of frequencies. This device is known as a 7-band EQ because it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 range of frequency areas that can be manipulated. Does that make sense? So this is a 7-band, and you know it because when you look at these up close, you see HPF, LPF, LF, element, MF, HMF, HF. And then the only variable here is this is a high-pass filter, a low-pass filter, low filter, low mid filter, and instead of immediately jumping to high mid filter, there's actually a mid filter in between high mid filter and high filter. But yeah, this is a 7-band. So if I were to go over to here, that particular device, I'm pretty sure that one only has a 3-band, and this one over here, I think this is a 3-band as well. Oh no, this one back here. Oh no, it does have high mid, low mid. Yeah, so this one's a 4-band. Sorry. If you were to look at that EQ on that graph back there on the Mackie, you'd see a 4-band. The reason it's important to know how many bands you have, of course, is because it's going to tell you how much manipulation you can use. So let's take a look at a couple things, okay? Now I'm going to jump off the slides and run back to Pro Tools real quick.
So just a side question, this is kind of on topic, but maybe off topic. Can you get your music mixed here?
Yeah, I mean you can work with Ron. I don't know I know you've been in the studio quite a bit.
Yeah, you can get it mixed, you can get it mastered here. I think Guild does mastering, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Pretty cheap here too. And I mean the great I don't know, I think you get students get a free hour, I'm pretty sure. 1 free hour. You still have to pay to get it. You still have to pay the engineer. I'm not sure how much it is, maybe.
Yeah, I'm not real familiar either.
Maybe 60. But that's relevant. That's pretty cheap. Tom's is 100, and you have to pay the engineer too. It's probably the engineer probably 100 an hour as well, unless you bring your own engineer. But it's still gonna be that. What? Yeah.
So you do band here?
No, I recorded with some of the music ensembles here. In the studio. My band recorded at 11th Street.
I know.
I think it's 65 an hour there.
11th Street?
Yeah.
Jesus.
They're really good there though.
That's what
It's close to there, yeah.
they have that like diesel art right across the street.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a great place.
Some guy was trying to get us to go places and but I don't know.
It's a cool place. I don't really recommend it for hip hop. The guys there are really cool.
Sorry, I'm gonna roll this for you. Grab a. All right. Let's see if I can get this. Sorry, because I'm coming through this adapter. The volume's really quiet. Ah, there we go. Hopefully it'll hold. So hey, This is this is run through a vintage compressor, so it's kind of got like this. It's more aggressive. It's not as clean, but the kind of sound I was using for this was a little more roomy. But if we go in, I'm just going to put a graph on this so you can see it. So our first item that we talked about was the high-pass filter. Oops. So this is your high-pass filter, HPF, and of course what this does is this will filter out anything below a certain range. So the frequency that's selected, it will only represent what's going on above it, basically. So right, you kind of see how that works out. So what we could do here is, actually I'm going to show you this is the low pass. It does the exact opposite. So in the low pass filter, it allows the lows to pass. Sorry, I don't know if this is supposed to be playing back. Nope. So this is the opposite, of course. So taking away the highs. You know, so this kind of sounds like listening to music from your neighbor, you know, bleeding through the wall. Now, so that's your high pass and your low pass. When they are used in combined effort, they're known as a band pass. This is very common to make something sound like it's telephonic. You know, very simple. You know, it's a very common technique. A lot of times what people do is they'll roll it like that for a bit, and then they'll open it up. You know, just kind of subdue it a little bit. Now, on both ends of our spectrum, so like that's your high pass, low pass, so that cuts it off. So that means that if I cut something here, nothing exists down here. Nothing will pass through the EQ. Make sense? So if you do that, you can't get it back anywhere later. But on the low end and high end of our spectrum, we have something called a shelf, which means in the shelf system, if we make an adjustment, it means from whatever frequency we pick all the way to the end of the spectrum, things will be manipulated. So watch how this works. Now what happens is that's a chosen frequency, and all the way to the end of the spectrum will be boosted. Notice how it rises all the way across. These are really good if you're looking at it going, that's just a little too bright overall. You know, if there's not a specific frequency, that's a bit of a problem. Then you can make a change. Now there's the same thing on the low end. It's over here. Now, these are really easy and good for things like that kick drum. You just kind of, it needs a little boost overall. Let's focus on the sub. Or maybe there's just too much. So there's high shelf, low shelf. Pretty simple, right? High shelf, it's a shelf. Whether it's positive or it's negative, either way it goes, it's a shelf. Now in the mid band, and you can use these in the high and low. On this, you can switch them. That's what this little icon here is. You can use that in the high. But in the mid band, this is where we have what we call peak and notch. Okay, peak is positive direction. Notch is notching it out in the negative direction. So sometimes what you'll see is a device called a notch filter. A notch filter means it's only moving in a negative direction. And a peak filter would mean it's only moving in a positive direction. There was a time, and it's kind of more in the vintage days, but a lot of the modern techniques that they, like when they build the synthesizers now in the software version, they'll build notch filters. But in the vintage days, they used to only, in the EQ, it used to only be cut. abilities. You would always just cut and not boost. The idea being that to cut a frequency generated less noise than it did to boost the frequency in the overall sound. So ideally they would make a system that would only be cuttable or notchable, as they would call it. So that's where that notch idea comes from. So you have peak and you have notch. Well, all these guys here in this mid-range are user selectable in terms of their frequency and their Q. These are all peak notch filters, meaning that's the function that they do. They can either go one way or the other. So you'll see, I mean, very easily. Hear that mid-range come out? Now, watch what happens with the Q. So what you can do with the Q, a lot of times you're going to use broad strokes. Like it's better to use broad strokes; they're more natural. But a lot of times when you need to use a little more of a tight Q with some sharp strokes, it might be because you're looking at a tone going, I don't really like that tone, and I want to eliminate it. Let's find. Now, my suggestion is if you don't know how to work with the EQ, there's two methods. One, you can just EQ it the way that you think it should sound. But the problem is most people don't know how to get to that sound. So the easy way to do it is to do the opposite, is what I always suggest. Let's say you're like, I feel like I need to turn the frequency range up. Easy way to find out which frequency range you should turn up, turn it down. And then what we call sweep the frequency, which means take the frequency knob and literally cycle it through the system. You'll notice when something falls out and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't live without that tone, that's the range you might need to boost. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're listening to it like going, oh, like it happens all the time with drums, oh, there's a ringing in the snare, where is it? Turn it up. As soon as you sweep for it, you'll find it be very obvious, and then you can cut that. So let's take a look. It's like right here. And then we can just go in and dial it out. Does that make sense? Pretty simple, right? Or like that hi-hat sizzle. If we're like, oh, there's too much hi-hat there, let's go find it. Tighten the Q. Does that make sense? Kind of nice and easy. A lot of times you want to make small adjustments though, you know. I mean, that's equalization in a nutshell in terms of how you choose what you choose. Now, here's what's interesting. By getting rid of, and I mentioned this before, by eliminating something, the neighboring tone tends to stick out. Sometimes that's a good thing for us. So like if we're looking at it going, you know, the kick drum's too muddy, let's go and eliminate something near the low end frequency range. A lot of times it's around this 100 range. Actually, this is higher. There it is. What it's going to do is it'll further emphasize the low end below it. This is without it. You hear the difference? Now, if you're wondering how this was set up, what I actually did, I don't know if you can see it. I use a live console. I use the live console in this. I tried basically with this drum setup. I attempted to do, what is it, a kick, snare? Oh, that's what I did. This is a 4 mic placement. So like, if you look at the drums back there, you know, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Plus the 2 overs, it's probably about a 7 or 8 mic placement. I tried a real simple 4 mic placement because I knew this drum vibe is going to be a loop. It's kind of loopy. It's just, you know, it's nothing crazy. There's not going to be a bunch of toms. So I literally took the toms out, just eliminated it from the room. Just did kick, snare, hat, and some cymbals. And all I did with this is a single kick, a single snare over the top, and then room mics. And what I did is I sent the kick through a vintage compressor and just kicked the snot out of it. And I did the same thing with the snare. And then on the room mics, what did I do? I did a stereo. Oh, I did 2 stereo dirties coming back. I'll solo these so you can actually hear what they're doing independently. I think this one should be the original. Oh yeah, there we go. Well, oh no, I did it. Did I do a tight print? Let's look. Yeah, this is the original. Hear how boring it is. And then here's this one. This one was put through compression. Give it kind of a grit. Here's the snare. That's the dry snare, not compressed. We're going to do compression next week, so we'll talk a little more about it. Here's a really compressed, and I just added a bunch of reverb on it. I mean, if it was dry, oh, I wonder if no, here it is. This is what it's like dry. Now, in this case, because you were asking, that verb I put in line so it could sound more roomy. Normally, I would do it as an aux. Here's room set left and right 1. Yeah, so this one's the, how do I do this? Oh, I did a mono room too, I think. This was the room. 2 mics, literally just set right in front of like I basically just put 2 mics in an XY pattern right in front of the kit, just like this. So it's just right here. Not a lot of space. But when you compress it, it kind of gives it that bigger feel. So that's why it's got that. And then this one I just slammed, so it's dirty. I hide it underneath. When you add them together, it feels a little better, but this one's like very industrial, which is kind of what I was going for this. And then I did a mono room just up front. So that although this isn't mixed, I don't think there's much in this. I think this is just like a couple piano synths. So that's pretty much all it is. Just a little bit of a vibe with the drums, but kind of see how EQ essentially is going to shape the overall tone. And if I were to look at some of these, what I ended up doing with the individual EQs, like this is the second kick. Notice it's just I use this one for punch. So oh no, this is the snare, huh? Yeah, that's why it's cut off down at the low. This is what it was before the EQ. A little tubby. Thin it out at the bottom. And you could still thin it out more if you really wanted to. Because you don't need that much down low. What else do we have? Oh, same thing here. A little dip in the... Yeah, so I mean that's it in a nutshell. Questions on equalization? Thoughts?
What part of this is going to be on the test?
Well, I mean, we're gonna. You need to know specifically from equalization. Obviously, there's not enough time for you to learn it, to digest it, to do it. You do need to understand the difference between what the filter types are. So, like, what's the difference between a high cut and a low cut, or a low pass and a high pass, a high shelf and a low shelf. I mean, does that make sense?
Right, like if you describe like what the music sounds like it's coming from next door, what type of filter it is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, in most cases, you'll literally get. I mean, an easy way is just, what is this?
Okay.
You know what I mean? Because I don't even know how much this is on the final. To be honest, I don't recall how much this is on the final. But this is good stuff for you to know, because equalization, like when you're working on your own projects, understanding this processing is huge for you, because it really cleans up the overall tone. This is in the slides. I'm going to share this on Canvas. This will be in these slides, so you can literally take a look at these if you wanted some thoughts or ideas. And again, I have more video of mixing techniques on YouTube, so if you wanted to check those out as well, you could.
So is there anybody that we can consult with, like as far as like our own stuff and like what we're trying to do with our own careers, or is it just kind of like we get to go into class, but that's it?
Well, I mean, you can consult with me or Chuck or Gail. Yeah, absolutely. It just depends on what you're going for. I guess you might want to.
I mean, I'm not expecting like, oh yeah, I got this record. Nah, I don't think that that's gonna happen. But I feel like as much knowledge as you can, like this is book knowledge, but I feel like you guys have street knowledge that if I get a chance, anybody gets a chance to sit down and talk with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's all doable. I mean, well, I'll say this. This is the precursor to the next level, which as you progress in the recording classes, you literally go from learning about what the concept is, and now that you know what the concept is, you're literally going to be doing it on the desk. You know what I mean? Like, so that's it's part of the process too. So like if you're able to do more, like if you're able to take more classes in that vein, that'll help you a lot, tremendously, in that kind of thing. In terms of your overall artistic career, it just depends. I mean, you can ask, to have advice from any of us. I mean, it's everybody's different. Like your path, it looks a lot different than every other individual. So it's hard to make like one overall blanket, like this is what you should be doing with your life, kind of thing. But
No, like not like I mean, life advice would be nice, assuming that everybody had like the right advice.
I know, right? Yeah.
No, but just I don't know, kind of like okay, you got some good things going on, going for you, whatever. Just kind of I don't know. So because I feel like one of the things for like musicians is having someone to bounce ideas off of and stuff like that. You can go to your friends, but they're your friends, and they tell you what friends tell you.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're more than happy to help. I mean, I know for me, I could tell you this. Biggest thing for me, I'm not on campus a lot, because I'm a part timer. So, and the other two guys are here full time. I'm more than happy to help. The easiest way to really get in touch with me when I'm not here, though, is just send me an email with thoughts or ideas or questions. I mean, because I'm at my other job, I'm just sitting there doing the same thing, working with students. So it's a difference between the fact that I'm not here all the time. Well, I'm actually the campus chair at Sanford Brown College, so I oversee the audio production program there. So yeah. So I mean, that's what I do on a day-to-day. So if you send me an email, man, I mean, you have my email address, right? Yeah, I mean, even after this class, I have students that get in touch with me about, this or that. But yeah, even after this class is over, if you got stuff going on or you need advice, absolutely. I mean, my professors were always there for me, and that was always huge. It's an integral part of the process. So feel free to reach out,
And I'll say this, and not as kind of like, I'm just going to say it, it's not grounded or whatever, but I've been with UNLV for like several years. And I feel like a lot of the teachers, they give you a textbook and like read this, but like we have a 3-hour something class with you and you're talking the entire time. And I think that's good.
Oh yeah. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, hey, this is fun stuff. I mean, this is a fun topic. I got to be honest. It's like this is I know this is the most boring that it gets. I'll be honest. This is as boring as it gets. And everything else from here, when you start application process, is just doing, it's really super exciting. And even when you have to, like for this class, because at the end you know, the next couple of weeks we're going to be working on this console, and one of the parts of your final exam is going to be on this console, like how to set it up, how to use it, how to route it, how to get it to work with Pro Tools. But even that is, I mean, that's cool and it's challenging, but it's not as exciting as it is when you finally get to sit down behind the glass and you get to work, you know. So I mean, I know it's, I was there, so just, you know, thank you for that. I really appreciate that, and just keep hanging in there because this gets better. Like this stuff gets cooler, you know. Once we don't have to talk about cable connections anymore. You know what I mean? And you know what they are, and it's just you know, you get to use it. I mean, yeah, you start getting into some really cool stuff. I mean, that's why I got into it because that was super exciting. Super exciting.
Do you teach some of the other classes that are like this, like the minor, or is it just this section?
Well, actually, I've only been teaching this section because I just started in February.
Oh, okay.
But I also teach the music business class.
Okay.
I started that this semester, and next semester I think I'm going to be doing some new stuff, which would be cool. I mean, but I've been teaching for years in the realms of, I mean, anything audio recording, music theory, music business, songwriting, composition. I mean, all those realms. You know, super fun for me because I've been doing it for a while. So, you know, yeah. But I'm excited about the future overall because hopefully this. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, but hopefully this program. Yeah, will be a major, and once it does, it'll just blossom and just explode, and that's when we'll have way more ability, you know, in reality, to look at it and go, yeah, let's focus more on, you know, the hard part about it with being a minor is, you know, it doesn't have, it's just not getting its full attention, you know what I mean? And I can't go to you, hey, don't fail my class, because it's not like it's a core element of your initial program. You know what I mean? So like it's harder. It's even harder to get everybody to just pay full attention. I mean, because I have students that are business majors, economics majors. I mean, some people that are in sciences and math, and it's like, and they want to learn this, which is cool. It's just, you know, I mean, it's going to be better when everybody that's in the room is literally here because this is all they want to do. You know what I mean? Because then it's like, well, we can all go together where we're going. You know, so.
Do you know when they're thinking of getting that going?
Well, I know that.